Hi, I'm Joe Finsternis, and tonight I'm going to be talking to you about a movie called The Thompsons. Now, I need to give you a big heads up here to start off with. This movie is a sequel to a film called The Hamiltons, and if you haven't seen The Hamiltons, it does come recommended, and I strongly suggest that you check that out before you watch this video, because in talking about this movie, I'm going to have to give away some pretty heavy spoilers about that first film. Once again, watch The Hamiltons first, then come back to this. Anyway, for those of you who have stayed and have not seen The Hamiltons and clearly don't give a shit about whether I spoil it for you, The Hamiltons is a film that leads you to believe that it's about a family of psychotic serial killers. And throughout the movie, they allude to having some sort of disease, and they say that they actually need to kill in order to survive. And, it sounds pretty batshit crazy, but then at the end, there's a big twist where it turns out that the Hamiltons are actually vampires, and they end up needing to switch homes and change their names to the Thompsons, hence the title of this movie. So, in this film, you're following the Thompsons. Mostly you're following Francis, who's one of the younger siblings in this family, and he was the main character of the Hamiltons as well. And in this film, he and his brothers and sister need to find more vampires somewhere else so that they can get help. But once they do finally run into some vampires, things don't go exactly as they had planned. Now, I really like how the vampires in this movie were sort of humanized. I mean, it never goes into overly sappy, emo bullshit territory in this film, but Francis provides a lot of heart in the movie, which sort of brings it down to earth. He has some voiceover narration in the film. There was one point where it even got me a little misty-eyed. As he was talking about their childhood, he says that his parents had to raise him and his siblings on a farm secluded from the outside world so that they could protect them since they were different. So, yeah, it definitely has quite a bit of heart to it, but it's not all about the drama, and it's not all about the tear-jerking moments. There are quite a few awesome scenes in this movie. When you see the vampires throw down, it gets pretty visceral. And just like every vampire family in a movie ever, this one does include a couple of loose cannons, and in this case, it comes in the form of these two twins, Darlene and Wendell. And aside from Francis, these are my favorite characters in the movie. It's a lot of fun to see them throwing down, a lot of fun to see them go into full-on monster mode and start hacking at people. Also, if you stay during the credits, there's a little scene involving them in the middle of the credits, which is pretty hilarious, but it's not really a tongue-in-cheek type of movie either. In fact, that bit during the end credits is really the only comedy scene in the movie. For the most part, it plays as just a straight drama with elements of horror and action mixed in. Now, there was one critic who apparently compared this to Twilight. It even says so on the cover. There's the quote, "It's Tarantino meets Twilight," and I can actually kind of see how it resembles Tarantino's style just a little bit. It is a pretty dialogue-driven story, but to compare this to Twilight is quite an insult. If anything, I would say that feels a little more like Near Dark. I mean, it's not quite as great as that film, but it has the same sort of badass, gritty, down and dirty vibe to it. And as far as it compares to the first film, my only major complaint with The Hamiltons was that it ran a little too slow for me and it got a little boring in parts. It was still a good story, and I enjoyed it quite a bit, but once again, it was a little too slow. This one has a much snappier pace than its predecessor, and I was more invested in the story. It flowed more fluidly, and the runtime is pretty short. It only goes on for 82 minutes, so it's not going to feel like you're sitting down forever with this film. My only major criticism of this film is, for one thing, it gets a little campy near the end. There's this elder vampire who, when he goes into full-on monster mode, it does look kind of cool. Like, the visual reminded me of Fright Night a little bit. His mouth got bigger, and he was able to grow all of his teeth into these needle-sharp fangs. And the movie was made on a low budget, so the CGI effects used on his mouth looked pretty cartoony. But while the actor did a very capable job up to this point, and he felt very believable, once he goes into monster mode, he comes off as more of a cartoon character. Like, he keeps opening his mouth and growling just to show off his teeth, and he has like this maniacal smile, and he punctuates every sentence with a growl. I mean, he could say something like, "Hey, would you please open the window? It's getting a little stuffy in here." Ah! I mean, it's not quite as ridiculous as that, but it's still pretty silly. And regarding the effects overall, once again, it's a low budget, so there are quite a few moments where it gets a little CGI blood splatter, which I still don't like. And there are some decent practical gore effects as well, but they still don't look all that convincing to me. But like I have already said a couple of times, it's a low budget, so I was able to forgive it for that. One complaint that I imagine some people would have is the fact that the vampires in this movie are able to walk around in the sunlight and be completely unaffected by it. And, whether vampires can walk around during the day or not is something that I can take or leave. I mean, I mentioned this way back in my first review for Vampire Girl versus Frankenstein Girl, but for those of you who didn't see that, vampires have not always been killed by sunlight. That didn't actually start until the first vampire movie, Nosferatu. If you go back and read Bram Stoker's Dracula, the title character of that novel was able to walk around in the sun without getting hurt. He just didn't have any power. So, once again, it's something that I can take or leave. As long as they're not sparkling, I'm fine with it. So yeah, overall, if you enjoyed the Hamiltons and if you enjoy vampire movies, I thought that this movie was pretty solid, and it definitely comes recommended. Anyway, that's all I've got to say about the Thompsons. I hope you all have a good one.